The night sky burns red over London. Sirens wail, searchlights carve through the dark, and the thunder of bombs shakes the city to its foundations. It is 1940, and Britain hangs by a thread. Across the Channel, the Nazi war machine has devoured France in weeks, sending millions of stunned refugees into exile. Newspapers call it the darkest hour. And yet, behind that curtain of smoke and ruin, history itself trembles on a knife's edge. Imagine, for a moment, a banner that never flew, the swastika over Buckingham Palace, the black uniformed SS patrolling Westminster. It never happened, but it could have. This is the power of fragile choices, razor-thin victories, and the terrifying what-if that keeps historians awake at night. We know how the story turned out. Britain endured, battered, but unbroken. Hitler, unable to conquer the skies, postponed his invasion. Soon after, his gaze turned eastward, toward the vast plains of the Soviet Union. And from that point, the Nazi Empire began its long, brutal unraveling. But history is not inevitable. It is not a straight line. It is a series of moments, cracks, in the ground where another path could have emerged, and in those cracks another world could have been born. Let's step back and set the stage. Europe. In the 1930s and early 1940s, the continent trembles under the rise of fascism. Hitler consolidates power in Germany, Mussolini marches in Italy, and militarists seize control in Japan. Across oceans, democracies watch with unease. Britain and France attempt appeasement, feeding concessions in hopes of buying peace. United States, haunted by the trauma of the First World War, retreats into wary isolation. Meanwhile, the Nazi war machine readies itself. The Wehrmacht mechanized divisions, panzer tanks, disciplined infantry moves with a speed the world has never seen. Blitzkrieg, the lightning war, is not just a tactic. It is shock and awe, modern warfare unleashed at dizzying velocity. In September 1939, Hitler invades Poland. Within weeks, Europe is at war. Maps flicker in your mind, Poland swallowed. Denmark and Norway falling in spring 1940, France collapsing in just 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Leaving Britain to fight alone? Dunkirk. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers ferried across the Channel, saved not by strength, but by miracle. Churchill calls it their finest hour, yet behind the speeches lies desperation. Britain blockaded. Bombed and bleeding, faces the possibility of invasion at any moment. Here is where history might have split. Operation Sea Lion, the German plan to invade Britain, was no fantasy. It was drawn, refined, and debated by Hitler's generals. The only barrier: control of the skies. If the Luftwaffe had broken the RAF, if radar stations had been destroyed, if British factories had faltered, London might have fallen. And yet Britain held. Pilots, the few, as Churchill called them, fought with ferocity. Radar technology gave warning. German bombing shifted from airfields to cities, giving the RAF precious time to recover. The skies remained contested and without air superiority. Hitler shelved the invasion, but consider this: what if he had not blinked? What if instead of turning east toward the Soviet Union, he pressed relentlessly west? What if the RAF had broken, Britain had fallen, and America remained uncertain? The world we know, our very present, would vanish like smoke. Already, you may feel the pull of this alternate thread. And that is the heartbeat of our story. Because to understand what could have been, we must first trace what was. So let us walk through the timeline. Let us retrace the real path of war, moment by moment, and mark the places where the ground might have shifted. 1939, Poland crushed. 1940, France devoured. 1941, Hitler turns against the Soviet Union, launching Operation Barbarossa. 1942, Stalingrad, frozen. Corpses, steel, and fireware, the tide begins to turn. 1944, Normandy, the greatest seaborne invasion in history, liberates Europe. 1945, Berlin in ruins, Hitler dead in a bunker. The Reich collapses. That is the world we inherited. Victory through blood, sacrifice, and endurance. A world in which democracies survived, scarred. But alternate history demands we ask the forbidden question. What if those victories never came? Close your eyes. Picture Europe not as it was in 1945, but as it might have been. Berlin triumphant. Moscow occupied. Britain silenced. America hesitant, distant, perhaps defeated before it could act. Would the map of the 20th century even resemble the one we know? The hinge of fate, my friends, lies in the smallest details. Radar screens in a dim English bunker stormed that. Grounds, Luftwaffe bombers, single commander's hesitation on the Eastern Front. And now, as we descend into this alternate timeline, we must ask ourselves, was victory truly inevitable? Or was it only the thinnest of threads keeping the world from darkness? Dawn over Europe, 1941. The continent lies under the shadow of a single empire. German soldiers march through Parisian boulevards, their boots echoing on cobblestones once alive with music and cafes. The Eiffel Tower still stands, but its heart is caged by banners of black and red. In the north, Denmark and Norway sit under occupation. In the south, Mussolini's Italy staggers, but clings to the Axis. And in the east, Hitler's gaze sharpens toward the horizon, the endless fields and forests of the Soviet Union. This is the reality of mid-war Europe, a continent conquered, occupied, and trembling. For ordinary people, daily life is survival. French mothers trade bread on black markets, whispering resistance in alleyways. Dutch children grow gaunt as food grows scarce, their bicycles seized by soldiers. In Warsaw, Jewish families are herded into ghettos, the walls closing in tighter every month. Across every occupied city, posters scream propaganda, Hitler as savior, the Reich as destiny. But beneath the surface, fear and hunger wrought the illusion of order. The war seems unstoppable. Blitzkrieg has shattered every army it faced. The Wehrmacht moves like a storm, sweeping aside defenses, crushing morale, rewriting borders in weeks. Generals who once studied Napoleon now study Hitler, marveling at his ability to collapse nations before they can even mobilize. But in Berlin, beneath the triumph, impatience grows. Hitler wants more. Here lies the hinge of fate. In June 1941, Hitler launches Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. It is a gamble beyond imagination. 3 million soldiers, the largest military campaign in history. At first, success is overwhelming. Soviet divisions collapse. By the hundreds of thousands, Kiev falls, Leningrad starves, Moscow shivers on the brink. The Nazi war machine pushes deep into the east, carving open the heart of Russia, and yet, this decision, this one colossal gamble, marks the beginning of Germany's undoing. Because the Eastern Front is not France. The Soviet Union is vast, unrelenting, and brutal. Winter descends, and with it, the Wehrmacht freezes. Supply lines stretch and break. Soldiers shiver in white fields, their tanks stalled by mud and snow. Stalingrad becomes the graveyard of Nazi ambition. Now step back. Imagine if this had not been the choice. Imagine if in 1940, instead of shifting eastward, Hitler had concentrated everything against Britain. No divided focus, no gamble in Russia. All energy directed at finishing the job across the channel. Britain was fragile. Bombs leveled neighborhoods in London, Coventry, and Liverpool. Civilians slept in underground stations, their dreams shattered by explosions above. Ration lines stretched across cities. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, sinking ships that brought vital supplies. Britain stood alone. It was only sheer endurance and American support that trickled slowly that kept it alive. What if that trickle had never been enough? What if the skies over England had been lost? The Luftwaffe came dangerously close. In the summer of 1940, British radar stations were bombed, fighter airfields nearly destroyed. For weeks, the outcome hung in balance. One more push, one more coordinated strike, and the RAF might have crumbled. And if the RAF had fallen, Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain would have been unleashed. Picture the beaches of southern England, not with Allied soldiers. Storming ashore in 1944, But with German troops landing in 1940, tanks rolling through Kent, paratroopers descending near Dover, London, bracing itself for occupation, think about the ripple effect. Without Britain, there is no staging ground for today. Without a Western ally, the United States hesitates longer, its politics torn between intervention and isolation. Without that pressure, the Soviet Union stands alone, facing the full fury of Nazi armies without distraction. Our reality victory in 1945 relied on a fragile balance. But that balance could have shattered so easily. And so, as we peel back the pages of history, the question sharpens. What if Germany had made different choices? Consider Hitler himself. Arrogant, impatient, convinced of destiny, he dismissed the logistical nightmare of Russia. But what if his advisors had persuaded him otherwise? What if the Wehrmacht's strength had been concentrated on the West, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, cutting Britain off, seizing oil, starving the Allied world before America could act? This is the fork in the road, the divergence point. It's a place where one altered decision reshapes the century. Close your eyes. Hear the hum of bombers over London. Feel the cold dread in Moscow. See the map spread across a German command table. Arrows pointing west instead of east. One move, one shift, and the 20th century belongs to the Reich. But that is the road we did not walk. That is the alternate timeline waiting in the shadows. And it is here at this hinge of fate that our story begins to fracture into two worlds. The history we know and the nightmare that could have been. Asterisk in Berlin. 1940, the capital of the Reich glowed with triumph. Orchlet parades marched down. Unter den Linden, flags draped from every balcony, and Goebbels' propaganda machine roared with promises of a new Europe. Crowds cheered as Hitler proclaimed victory after victory, each speech echoing across radios into the occupied world. But beneath the rhythm of boots and banners lay a dangerous truth. This empire was not yet unshakably, was precariously balanced, always one gamble away from collapse. To understand how fragile it was, imagine the world through the eyes of its people. In Paris, a cafe once filled with laughter now sits in silence as German officers sip coffee, their polished boots marking possession more than presence. Resistance whispers in code, messages tucked into loaves of bread. Graffiti scrawled in haste on midnight walls. Vive la France libre. Yet each whisper risks death. In London, searchlights sweep the skies night after night. Families huddle in underground stations, soot and sweat mixing with fear as bombs thunder above. A child clutches a tin toy, asking if the war will ever end. His mother, unable to answer, simply rocks him in rhythm with the tremors of falling bombs. The capital of the free world is bruised but not broken. In Moscow, Stalin fumes. The Soviet Union, still bound and uneasy, packed with Germany, watches warily, preparing but not yet knowing when the betrayal will come. The Red Army rebuilds. Spies send frantic cables, and entire factories uproot eastward in anticipation of invasion. History will soon deliver its harshest winter, but in this moment, the East holds its breath, and across the Atlantic, America debates. President Roosevelt feels the pull of destiny, warning that the fire in Europe will not stay contained, yet Congress resists. The public clings to neutrality. Isolationism whispers, "It's not our fight." Roosevelt pushes the Lend-Lease program, sending ships, supplies, and hope to Britain. But without direct involvement, it may not be enough. This is the canvas of reality, a world on edge. It's uncertain which way it will fall. Now imagine the alternate. Brushstroke. Imagine the Luftwaffe completing its destruction of Britain's air defenses. Imagine radar towers turned to rubble, Spitfires in flames, pilots too few to rise again. In Berlin, the announcement comes. The skies are ours. Operation Sea Lion moves from blueprint to reality. Barges line the Channel coast, engines roar, paratroopers drill for their leap across the sea. Had it happened, London might have endured not just bombs, but boots on its streets. The British monarchy fleeing north, Churchill captured or killed, the government forced to sign humiliating peace. 1,000 years of British history silenced in a single season. This divergence is not fantasy, it was one choice away. And it is this choice that defines the very core of our alternate path. Because if Britain falls, what happens next? No staging ground for the Allies in 1944. No hope of Western Europe's liberation. Now, America, facing not a partnership, but a wall. Of Axis control across the Atlantic may hesitate longer, calculating risks with lives on the line. And in the East, the Soviet Union bears the full weight of Nazi fury without respite. A war even more catastrophic than the one we know. And yet, even here, another possibility glimmers. What if Hitler, intoxicated by victory, had chosen not to push east at all, but south into the oil fields of the Middle East, the Suez Canal, the riches of empire? Rommel's Africa Corps, already legendary, might have linked with forces in the Caucasus, strangling the Allies of fuel, seizing lifelines that fed their tanks and ships. This is why alternate history grips us, forces us to see how delicate the world truly was. Victory was not destiny, it was a thread, fragile and frayed, held together by sacrifice and chance. So let us pause. Let us hold this moment in our minds. 1940 to 41, the fulcrum of history. Britain battered, the Soviet Union unprepared, America uncertain, Germany triumphant, yet not unstoppable. One decision, one hinge, and everything could have shifted. And now, as we prepare to dive into that alternate world, I must ask you, are you ready to imagine it? Because the journey ahead is not gentle. It is not clean. It is a vision of hunger, fear, and fire, a vision of what the 20th century might have become if Germany had won. Before we step into that nightmare, I want to invite you to become part of this exploration. If you're gripped by this story, if you can already feel the weight of history pressing on these fragile choices, then take a moment, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Let us what you would have done differently. If you were in the war room, staring at those maps, did you strike east, west, seek peace, or gamble everything as Hitler did? Your voice is part of this journey, because history even imagined is a dialogue. And now we leave the world we know, cross into the shadow world. A world where Britain falls, a world where America hesitates, a world where the Reich does not collapse in 1945, but rises higher. The question is no longer what if. The question is, are you ready to see the nightmare unfold? The channel is silent at first, its waves rolling gently under a misty dawn. Then the horizon trembles. Barges, trawlers, and destroyers surge forward in a jagged line, carrying the weight of the Reich across the sea. It is September 1940. Operation Sea Lion has begun. British radar screens, usually buzzing with early warning signals, flicker into darkness, bombed to rubble days before. The RAF, exhausted, outnumbered, and outgunned, cannot rise in force. The Spitfires scramble but are shot. From the skies, civilians in Kent peer upward, seeing parachutes bloom across the morning clouds. German paratroopers land in fields, cutting telegraph wires, capturing bridges. The war has come home. By noon, Dover burns. By nightfall, the 1st Panzer units rumble ashore, their treads grinding on English soil. Resistance is immediate home. Guard volunteers, farmers with rifles. Policemen turn soldiers, but against battle-hardened Wehrmacht troops, their courage cannot hold the line. Villages are seized, coastal roads blocked. The German flag rises over the cliffs of Dover. Churchill refuses to surrender. His voice, hoarse but unyielding, crackles over the BBC. We shall fight in the streets. We shall fight in the fields. We shall never yield to tyranny. Yet the reality on the ground is brutal. London braces as bombs rain down. And now rumors spread of German tanks already rolling toward the capital. Within weeks, the government evacuates north. The king and royal family are whisked to Canada. Churchill, trapped in besieged London, becomes the rallying symbol of resistance. But by November, he is captured, paraded before cameras as a prisoner of war. Britain, the island fortress, has fallen. Here the nightmare accelerates. Without Britain, the Atlantic is transformed. German U-boats and aircraft dominate shipping lanes. American convoys, once able to dock in Liverpool and Glasgow, now find every port closed. Roosevelt faces a nightmare. How to intervene when every beach in Western Europe belongs to the Reich. Neutral voices in Congress grow louder. Why spill American blood for a Europe already lost? Meanwhile, in Berlin, triumph. Hitler declares the 1,000-year Reich secure. The victory parades dwarf anything before them, 500,000 marchers. Banners blotting the sky, fireworks illuminating Brandenburg Gate. Goebbels proclaims the dawn of a new age. The SS begins its darkest work, enforcing Germanization across the continent. France becomes little more than a vassal state, stripped of resources. Norway supplies iron. The Netherlands its ports, seas becomes the Reich's naval hub. In Britain itself, the proud empire is partitioned. Collaborators rise in London, while resistance fighters vanish into prisons or firing squads. But Hitler's hunger is not sated. With Western Europe subdued, his eyes turn east. Operation Barbarossa begins not in June 1941, but earlier, and with far greater force. No need to bomb Britain. No need to hold back divisions along the Channel. 3 million soldiers becomes 4. Luftwaffe squadrons, once bombing London, now sweep over Minsk, Smolensk, Kiev. The Soviet Union, already reeling, is crushed even faster. By winter, Moscow is encircled. Stalin flees to the Urals, swearing vengeance, but his armies disintegrate. Leningrad falls, not after years of siege, but within months, starved into submission. By 1942, the Reich stretches from the Atlantic coast to the Ural Mountains, and with Soviet oil, coal, and wheat pouring into German hands, the war machine grows unstoppable. Now pause and contrast. In our real timeline, Stalingrad was the turning point. The Red Army held. Soviet factories relocated east, outproduced the Germans. Winter shattered the Wehrmacht, and slowly, painfully, the tide turned. But in this world, this nightmare, there is no Stalingrad. There is no Eastern Front collapse. There's only endless conquest. The consequences ripple outward. Japan, astonished by German success, becomes emboldened. Instead of risking war with the United States in 1941, Tokyo strengthens ties with Berlin, coordinating plans to divide Asia and the Pacific. Perhaps Pearl Harbor never comes, or if it does, it comes with German submarines already prowling the Atlantic, tying down the American Navy on 2 fronts. And what of resistance? Francis Mackay, Britain's underground fighters, Soviet partisans, they exist, but they bleed out quickly against the Gestapo and SS, whose methods grow ever more ruthless. Mass deportations sweep across conquered lands. Camps expand not just in Poland, but across all of Europe. Entire populations vanish into the machinery of the Reich. The United States stands horrified. Roosevelt pushes for war, but the mood of the nation is different. There is no plucky Britain to rally behind, no hope of an Allied landing. There is only the prospect of facing the Axis on an oceanic battlefield. Even with America's industrial might, how long before its resolve falters? Before isolationism wins again? This is the beginning of the worst-case scenario. A Europe enslaved, the Soviet Union dismantled, America hesitating at the edge of the abyss. A Nazi empire stretching across continents, fueled by resources, blood, and terror, and the world, and this vision has only begun to collapse. Winter settles over a conquered Europe, but it brings no peace. The Reich feeds its armies first, its citizens second, and its occupied peoples last, if at all. In Paris, families line up for bread only to find empty shelves. In Warsaw, rations are cut so sharply that children collapse in the streets. In Athens, famine grips the city, claiming tens of thousands. The Nazi Empire does not nourish its starves, taking grain oil, steel for its war machine while letting millions wither. Resistance flares, but each spark is crushed with merciless precision. In France, railway saboteurs derail a supply. Train bound for the Eastern Front, the Gestapo responds by executing 100 civilians in reprisal, their names posted on every street corner. In Britain, what remains of the Royal Navy launches daring raids from exile in Canada. But German reprisals are brutal. Collaborators are rewarded, rebels hanged in public squares. The message is clear: defy the Reich and entire communities. We'll pay the price? Meanwhile, in Berlin, the machinery of empire accelerates. The SS redraws maps, resettling undesirable populations. German colonists are promised new lands in the east, carved from conquered Soviet soil. Entire villages vanish, their residents deported or executed to make way for settlers. The dream of Lebensraum, living space, becomes a reality. A slogan, but a policy written in blood. And beyond Europe, the Axis stretches further. In North Africa, Rommel's Afrika Korps, reinforced by divisions once tied down in France, smashes through British lines. Alexandria falls. The Suez Canal lifeline of empire slips into Axis's hands. Hitler, smiling for the cameras, points to the map. The Mediterranean is a German lake. From there, the path to the Middle East is open. German forces push into Iraq and Iran, linking with local uprisings against British control. Oil fields, the black blood of modern war, pour into the Reich's grasp. Fuel for tanks, planes, and ships flows not just from Romania or the Caucasus, but from the Persian Gulf itself. For the British Empire, this is catastrophe. Cut off from India, stripped of its colonial arteries, it becomes a shell of its former self. In Delhi, colonial officials whisper about collapse. In Cairo, officers debate surrender. The empire that once ruled the seas finds itself cornered, its backbone snapped, and still the nightmare spreads. With oil secure, the Reich turns toward Africa. Vichy colonies fold into German control, while Italy, revitalized under Hitler's shadow, pushes deeper into Ethiopia and Sudan. By 1943, in this alternate timeline, the Axis banner waves not just over Europe, but across the Middle East and North Africa. What of America during this maelstrom? Roosevelt rages. He urges Congress to see the threat, to act before it is too late. Yet in this world, isolationists hold the upper hand. They point to Britain's surrender, to France's collapse, to the Soviet Union's defeat, and they ask, what hope is there? Why should American sons die for a lost cause? Pearl Harbor, too, plays differently here. In our timeline, Japan attacked in December 1941, dragging America into the war. But in this nightmare, Tokyo sees a stronger Reich, a Europe unified under Axis banners. Instead of risking a two-front war, Japanese diplomats bargain. They propose a deal: the Pacific for Japan, the Atlantic for Germany. Roosevelt, already overwhelmed, faces a shattering possibility. Axis alliance that divides the globe like spoils at a banquet. The consequences reach ordinary Americans as well. Ships sunk in the Atlantic cut supply lines. Prices of goods rise. Families debate in diners and living rooms. Should we intervene? Can we even win? Young men, already weary from Depression-era struggles, hesitate at the thought of fighting not just in France or Italy, but across a world dominated by Axis powers. Now consider the psychological toll on the world. Propaganda flows like poison. German-controlled radio broadcasts declare the war over, the Reich eternal. Films show smiling families under swastika banners, cities rebuilt in marble grandeur. Children in occupied schools pledge loyalty to Hitler, their lessons rewritten to erase democracy, to glorify empire. But beneath the propaganda, terror festers. Secret police patrol every city. Neighbors vanish in the night. The line between survival and collaboration blurs. How many turn informer to save their families? How many betray friends for one more loaf of bread? And yet, despite the darkness, small flames refuse to die. In the forests of Poland, ragged partisans strike convoys. Rebels harass German patrols. Bells harass German patrols. In hidden basements of London and Paris, presses churn out illegal newspapers, declaring that the fight is not over. Each act is tiny, fragile, but together they prove that even in the Reich's worst nightmare of dominance, resistance still breathes. Still, the larger picture remains grim. By 1943, the Axis stands at its zenith. Europe subdued, the Middle East seized, Africa divided, Asia aligned with Japan. The Reich stretches farther than Rome or Napoleon ever dreamed. Its armies are fueled by oil, its industries fed by enslaved labor, its borders defended by oceans and allies. In America, the one power capable of challenging it stands isolated. A giant, but a hesitant giant, trapped between fear of involvement and fear of irrelevance. Roosevelt's speeches grow more desperate, his health begins to falter. In the halls of Congress, voices rise. Why fight a world already lost? Better to protect our hemisphere? Better to guard our shores? This is the nightmare taking shape. Not just a Europe lost, but a world collapsing into spheres of tyranny. Divided between Berlin and Tokyo, and still, the question looms like a thunderhead. If America does not rise, who will? By 1944, in this alternate world, the map is nearly unrecognizable. The Reichseagle stretches its wings from the Atlantic to the Persian Gulf, from Norway's fjords to the sands of Cairo. Across this empire, the human cost is staggering. In occupied Europe, famine becomes a weapon. Crops from Ukraine and Russia flow westward to feed German cities, leaving locals to starve. In Poland, hunger carves hollow eyes into the faces of children. In Greece, corpses line the streets during the Great Famine winters. Even in Britain, once an empire of plenty, people subsist on scraps. Resistance cells struggle not only against the Gestapo, but against gnawing hunger that robs them of strength, and the camps expand. In our reality, the Holocaust was carried out with chilling efficiency, even as Germany faltered. But in this alternate path, with the Reich triumphant and unchallenged, its machinery of extermination grows unchecked. Deportations spread from Poland to France, the Netherlands, even Britain. Entire neighborhoods vanish in the night. By 1945, millions more have disappeared into the abyss, their names erased, their fates sealed in silence. Still, resistance refuses. To die in the forests of Belarus, partisans mount daring raids on German railways. In the highlands of Yugoslavia, fighters strike convoys before melting into the hills. In London, underground cells broadcast crackling radio messages, urging Americans to act. That every success is followed by retaliation. Entire villages are burned to ash as warnings. Resistance leaders are executed in public squares, their bodies left hanging for days, and America watches. Roosevelt, increasingly frail, pleads with Congress. If we do not act, we will inherit a world built on slavery and fear. But many lawmakers remain unmoved. They point to the vast Atlantic, now patrolled by German submarines, and to the Pacific, guarded by Japanese fleets. They argue that intervention is suicide. Better, they claim, to fortify the Americas, to build walls of steel around the Western Hemisphere. Isolation becomes a tempting illusion. But illusions cannot withstand reality forever. German U-boats, emboldened, prowl further west. Merchant ships bound for New York vanish beneath the waves. In 1944, a U-boat surfaces brazenly off the coast of Virginia, shelling a refinery before slipping back into the depths. Panic spreads. For the first time, Americans see smoke rising not from Europe, but from their own shores. And then comes the greater shadow, science itself, bending to tyranny. In our real history, the Manhattan Project was a desperate race to build the atomic bomb before Germany could, but in this nightmare, with resources stripped from a conquered Soviet Union and mines seized from every university of Europe, the Reich pushes its own nuclear program forward. Uranium from Czechoslovakia, scientists coerced from Paris and Vienna. Whole laboratories devoted to splitting the atom by 1945. Whispers reach Washington, the Reich is close, too close. Intelligence reports speak of tests in the Urals, of strange flashes in the night. Roosevelt knows the implications an atomic bomb in Hitler's hands would not just secure Europe, it would secure the world. The United States is now trapped in a corner. Stay neutral and watch the Reich dominate forever. Intervene and risk. Facing not only the largest army in history, one armed with weapons beyond imagination. The question echoes in every home. Can America afford to wait? Or has it already waited too long? And still, the world collapses. In India, Independence movements rise, but instead of freedom, they are met with German advisors arriving to exploit the power vacuum left by Britain's fall. In the middle, East oil fields burn as Axis and local factions carve territory. Africa, once divided by European colonies, now bleeds under German and Italian boots. Even South America is not untouched. Argentina, sympathetic to the Axis, becomes a staging ground for propaganda. German agents spread whispers of alliance, promises of prosperity under Reich partnership. Brazil, fearful of encirclement, turns to the United States for protection. The Western Hemisphere itself begins to fracture under the pressure. The Reich's propaganda machine declares victory inevitable. Films show grand cities rising, Berlin redesigned into Germania, a marble capital meant to dwarf Rome and Washington alike. Children pledge loyalty in classrooms. Factories churn endlessly, powered by slave labor. Across every border, the Reich projects permanence, and yet beneath the marble facade, cracks remain. Armies stretch thin across thousands of miles, populations simmering under occupation. A nuclear program still uncertain, its progress plagued by secrecy and sabotage. But to the world outside, appears unstoppable. This is the nightmare's greatest weapon. Not just guns or bombs, but despair. The sense that resistance is futile, that the future belongs only to the swastika. Now ask yourself, what would you do in this world? Do you flee across oceans, seeking refuge in America? Do you fight from the shadows, knowing you might not live to see victory? Or would you bow, convincing yourself survival is enough? This is the terror of the worst-case scenario. Not only that nations fall, but that hope itself begins to collapse. And yet history shows us something else, that even in the darkest timeline, the human spirit claws for light. But will it be enough when the Reich's horizon is global, and the atom itself bends to its will? Asterisk, the year is 1946 in this nightmare world. The swastika is no longer a banner of conquest, it is the fabric of daily life. Across Europe it hangs from every courthouse, every train station, every school. Children in Paris recite lessons not in French, but in German. In London, ration books carry the Reich seal, stamped with the face of Hitler. The empire that once seemed unimaginable has become ordinary. Its tyranny woven into the rhythm of existence, yet this is no peace. It is suffocation. In Berlin, Hitler presides over ceremonies of grandeur, laying the first stones of Germania, the city intended to outshine every capital on earth. Yet outside the pomp, whispers of fear echo. Entire populations vanish. In deportations, cities that once glimmered with culture stand hollowed by censorship. Radios broadcast one voice only, the Reich's. Across the globe, the Axis tightens its grip. In Asia, Japan's empire sprawls from Manchuria to the Pacific Islands, its reach stretching deeper into the Indian Ocean. With Britain gone, colonial defenses collapse. Japanese troops march into India, declaring liberation, but imposing their own rule. Berlin and Tokyo draw maps together, dividing spheres of influence like carving meat at a banquet table. The Atlantic and Europe to Germany, Pacific and Asia to Japan. The world itself is partitioned, and America, by now Roosevelt, is gone, his frail body worn out by years of strain. Successor inherits a nation restless, divided, and deeply afraid. In New York, refugees from Europe pour into overcrowded ports. French intellectuals, British aristocrats, Jewish survivors who managed to escape the camps. Their stories horrify the public, but they also spread despair. If Europe has fallen, what chance does anyone else have? Congress debates endlessly. One faction cries for Fortress America. Fortify the coastlines, build bomb shelters, prepare for a defensive century. Another faction demands intervention before the Reich in Japan. Lock their grip on the planet forever. The president hesitates, knowing that either choice could decide the fate of generations. And then comes the unthinkable. In August 1946, reports reach Washington of a blinding flash in the Urals. German scientists, funded by stolen wealth and slave labor, have split the atom. The Reich possesses a bomb. It's not a rumor, not a whisper. but a test witnessed by spies. It's confirmed by satellites and proclaimed by Berlin itself. The world holds its breath. In London, collaborators boast that their city is safe-shielded by Germany's nuclear might. In Paris, posters declare the Reich's bomb as the sword of eternal peace. In Moscow, reduced to a puppet regime, silence reigns. And in Washington, shock gives way to terror. The Manhattan Project races forward, but without the same urgency. Without Britain's laboratories and bases, America lags. The Reich is first. The strategic balance of the globe has changed forever. Imagine the consequences. German bombers, capable of reaching the Atlantic coast, now carrying weapons that can erase cities. New York, Washington, Boston, all within reach. Japanese carriers, armed with German technology, patrolling the Pacific. The United States, for the first time in its history, faces the possibility of destruction not decades away, but within hours of an enemy's decision, and so, America is forced into a decision it cannot avoid. Do nothing, and the Reich's dominance becomes eternal, its shadow stretching over every continent. Act, and the United States risks nuclear war against an enemy already entrenched from France to India. Either path leads to peril. Meanwhile, resistance movements across the world look desperately to America. It's from Paris basements to Polish forests. From Greek mountains to Indian villages, fighters send coded messages. Do not abandon us. If you rise, we will rise with you. But will those voices be enough to move a nation paralyzed by fear? The world teeters on the edge of chaos. In Berlin, Hitler dreams of global empire, his hand resting on a globe as cameras flash. In Tokyo, generals speak of pushing across the Pacific, of striking Hawaii, of severing America's reach. In Washington, military planners unroll maps of a world divided in two, asking themselves the question no one dares answer aloud: can freedom survive? In a world already conquered, the nightmare is complete. A Nazi empire stretching across continents, Japan ruling the Pacific, the United States alone, outnumbered, outgunned, possibly outpaced in nuclear technology, and yet history has never been static. Even in this, darkest vision cracks form, questions linger, and choices remain. But the cliff's edge is here. The question is no longer what if Germany had one. The question is, what will America do now that it is the last free giant standing? Answer will decide not just battles, but the fate of civilization itself. The nightmare we have just walked through is one path, but history does not always break into extremes. Sometimes power finds a fragile equilibrium, a balance neither victory nor defeat, but something in between. Germany still wins the war in Europe, but instead of world conquest, it achieves a stalemated tense coexistence with the United States. The divergence begins the same way. Britain falters, France falls, and the Reich dominates continental Europe. Yet in this version, Hitler restrains his ambitions. Instead of gambling on a reckless drive to the Urals or plunging into North Africa with boundless hunger, he makes the calculation of a chess master: consolidate first, then expand. And so in this scenario, Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain, never fully materializes. London is bombed mercilessly, shipping lanes are strangled, but Britain does not fall. Instead, it becomes an island under siege, isolated and battered, but not occupied. German U-boats dominate the Atlantic, cutting Britain from supplies, but Churchill, exiled to Scotland, refuses surrender. His voice broadcast on clandestine radios keeps hope alive, though the reality is grim. For Hitler, this is enough. He can afford to let Britain bleed slowly, like a lion circling prey. He turns instead toward the east, launching Operation Barbarossa in 1941. Much as in our real history, the difference lies in how the war unfolds. Without Britain as a staging ground for American aid, the Soviet Union stands alone. Lend-Lease convoys through the Arctic are reduced to a trickle, hunted by U-boats and Luftwaffe squadrons. Soviet factories relocate eastward, but production lags. The Wehrmacht, while not flawless, advances deeper and faster. Kiev falls sooner. Moscow comes under siege, And while the Soviets do not collapse entirely, they are crippled. Stalin clings to the Urals, his grip shaky, his armies in retreat. The Soviet Union is not destroyed, but it is reduced to a battered shell, unable to mount the sweeping counteroffensives that turned the tide in our world. This is the first layer of the alternate equilibrium, a Europe dominated by Germany. But with Britain holding on like a wounded animal and the Soviet Union surviving, in fragments, the second layer unfolds across the oceans. America watches carefully, but it does not rush into the war as it did in reality. With Britain isolated and the Soviets weakened, Roosevelt faces a divided nation. Isolationists insist, why enter a war that cannot be won? Interventionists counter, if Europe falls completely, we will face the Reich alone. The debate consumes Congress, delaying full-scale action, and then comes Japan. In our reality, Tokyo attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, dragging America into the war. But in this timeline, Japanese generals calculate differently. They see Germany dominating Europe, but they also see a wary United States bristling with naval power. To strike America would be to invite disaster. Instead, Japan extends cautiously into Southeast Asia, seizing colonies from weakened European powers but avoiding direct confrontation with Washington. The result is a strange balance. Germany dominates Europe, Japan dominates Asia, America dominates the Western Hemisphere. The world becomes a chessboard of giants, each wary of provoking total war. But beneath the surface, the cracks are many. In occupied Europe, German control is not absolute. Resistance movements simmer, fueled by hunger and hatred. France is restless, Yugoslavia aflame, Poland ungovernable except through terror. The SS cracks down, but unrest never dies. For every collaborator, there are 5 who resist in silence. Britain, though isolated, becomes a symbol. Its broadcasts inspire underground fighters. Its government in exile coordinates resistance. And though it is weakened, it still holds the Royal Navy, still holds out the possibility faint, though it seems that the Reich is not unbreakable. In the East, Stalin refuses surrender. His armies are battered, his territory shrunken, but his iron will endures. The Soviet Union becomes a guerrilla state, a vast hinterland of partisan warfare, raids, and sabotage. The dream of the Red Army storming Berlin may be gone, but the nightmare of endless resistance bleeds the Wehrmacht year after year. And in America, the debate intensifies. Each U-boat attack on a U.S. convoy, each refugee story arriving from Europe, fuels the call for intervention. Roosevelt maneuvers carefully, expanding the military, preparing industry, inching closer to war without fully declaring it. The result is not the apocalypse of Section 2, but something colder, subtler, and perhaps even more dangerous, a divided world balanced on the edge of another war. The 20th century in this timeline looks profoundly different. Instead of an Allied victory in 1945, we have a tense truce. The Reich dominating Europe, Japan controlling Asia, America standing watch over the West. There is no D-Day, no liberation of Paris, no triumphant march into Berlin. Instead, there is a world divided into spheres of power, each bracing for a conflict that could ignite at any moment. And yet, what would life have felt like in such a world? In Berlin, parades would still thunder, but whispers in cafes would speak of unrest in Warsaw, bombings in Yugoslavia, assassinations in Paris. In London, ration lines would stretch endlessly, yet hope would smolder in every speech Churchill sent over the airwaves. In Moscow, Stalin's iron grip would keep the fragments of his empire alive, even as hunger and cold devoured his people. In Washington, the Capitol would echo with arguments, each senator asking, should we risk everything or protect what we already have? It is a colder nightmare, perhaps, but no less dramatic. Because in this scenario, the war never truly ends. It simply freezes into a stalemate, a peace colder than any Cold War we have known. And it raises the question, how long could such a balance last before it shattered into fire again? Imagine walking through Paris in this alternate 1940s. The city still glitters with its monuments. The Seine flowing under bridges, Notre Dame standing tall, but the spirit is caged. German officers stride along the boulevards, their uniforms immaculate, their presence constant. Cafes remain open, but whispers hush as black boots approach. Newspapers, once alive with satire and critique, now print only Reich-approved headlines. Germany brings order to Europe. Children in schools memorize German phrases, their history lessons rewritten to glorify empire. Yet beneath the surface, a second city exists. Resistance fighters gather in cellars, passing notes written in invisible ink. Radios smuggled from Britain crackle with Churchill's voice, defiant even from exile. At night, posters bloom on walls, France lives. Each morning, the Gestapo tears them down. The city is a theater of silence and rebellion, of collaboration and defiance. Each step a choice between survival and resistance. This is what victory looks like in the moderate scenario. The Reich dominates, but domination is never absolute. Every occupied city becomes a battleground, not of tanks, but of ideas, loyalties, courage. In Britain, life is harsher still. Cut off from the world, its ports blockaded. The nation survives on rationing tighter than in our real history. Families grow thinner with each passing winter. Coal shortages darken homes, yet the spirit remains unbroken. Across Scotland and Wales, clandestine airfields still host pilots. Royal Navy remnants strike convoys in daring raids. The British government in exile survives, stubbornly declaring that Britain is bruised but not defeated. To the Reich, Britain is an irritation. It cannot fully kill. To the world, it is a flickering symbol that tyranny has not yet claimed everything. Further east, the Soviet Union lingers in twilight. Stalin still reigns, but his empire has shrunk. Moscow lies in ruins, Leningrad battered into submission, Ukraine and Belarus under German rule. Yet in the Urals, factories hum, partisan bands slash supply lines. Soviet propaganda broadcasts declare, "The motherland fights on." The Soviet Union has not fallen, but it is no longer a superpower. It is a bleeding giant, clinging to survival. And across the oceans, the United States waits. Washington in this world is a city of debates. Senators thunder against intervention, citing the oceans as America's fortress. Isolationists argue that Europe's fate is sealed, that the US must protect its hemisphere. Yet every week brings news of another atrocity. Deportations from France, executions in Poland, resistance crushed in Yugoslavia. Refugees arriving in New York tell stories of famine and oppression. Begging America not to stand idle, Roosevelt, or perhaps his successor, walks a tightrope. The US military expands quietly, factories roar with production, but the nation stops. Short of full-scale war, America becomes the arsenal of democracy without yet firing its own guns. It ships supplies where possible, smuggles aid to resistance fighters, and fortifies its own shores. The world watches, wondering, will America intervene? Will it allow tyranny to calcify into permanence? Meanwhile, propaganda floods every border. In Berlin, Goebbels crafts a narrative of stability. Newsreels show smiling families, new autobahns. Cities rebuilt under order. Collaborators across Europe are paraded as proof of the Reich's civilized rule. But the cracks show through. Black markets thrive. Underground presses print banned newspapers. Whisper networks pass names of collaborators, marking them for retribution. No matter how strong the Reich's grip, the flame of defiance flickers. In Asia, Japan's empire mirrors this uneasy equilibrium. Tokyo controls China's coast, Indochina, and the Pacific Islands. Yet its rule, too, is fragile. Guerrilla fighters resist in the jungles of Burma, the mountains of the Philippines, the villages of China. Japanese officials boast of Asian prosperity. But hunger and fear tell a different story, and so the globe exists in tension. Three powers dominate: Germany in Europe, Japan in Asia, America in the West. Each builds walls of propaganda to assure its citizens that the balance will last. That peace has been achieved. Yet beneath those walls, everyone knows the truth. peace is only the pause between wars. For the ordinary person, daily life depends on geography. A Parisian clerk works under German eyes, feeding his family while secretly funding the resistance. A British mother tucks her children into bed, praying the next air raid spares their home. A Soviet factory worker toils 16 hours a day, building tanks for an army too weak to reclaim the land. An American farmer in Kansas listens to the radio, wondering if his sons will be called to fight on shores they have never seen. This is the moderate world, not an apocalypse, but a suffocating stalemate. And sometimes stalemates can be worse, dragging on for decades, corroding hope, and planting seeds for an even greater war. Ask yourself, would such a balance last? Or would one misstep, one clash in the Atlantic or Pacific, ignite the globe again? In fire? Because in this scenario, the world holds its breath, but for how long? Asterisk, in this alternate world of uneasy balance, diplomacy becomes as dangerous as any battlefield. Ambassadors replace generals, treaties substitute for invasions, and every handshake conceals a knife. In Berlin, the Reich convenes its so-called European Council, a body of puppet governments and collaborators. French officials installed by German decree sit alongside Dutch administrators and Italian ministers. The council's chambers glitter with marble and banners, but everyone knows who holds the real power. Hitler's word is law, echoed by Himmler's iron fist and Goebbels' propaganda machine. The council is theater, designed to present the illusion of unity. But beneath the surface, resentment festers. Diplomacy extends further still. Berlin sends envoys to Ankara, pressing Turkey to join the Axis orbit. Oil routes through the middle. East are guarded by German troops, their presence justified as protection, but felt as occupation. Neutral nations, Sweden, Switzerland, Spain, navigate perilous waters, trading with the Reich while fearing its appetite. In Tokyo, the Axis partner mirrors this strategy. Japan builds its own co-prosperity sphere, convening puppet states. From Burma to Manchukuo, leaders are paraded as allies, though their authority is little more than paper. Tokyo's diplomats send cables to Berlin, negotiating spheres of influence. You hold Europe. We hold Asia, and the Americas remain untouched for. Now, and what of Washington? Here lies the fulcrum of this fragile peace. The United States, though wary, accepts diplomatic channels. Envoys shuttle between capitals. Conferences attempt to draft non-aggression accords. American officials insist they are guarding peace, but everyone knows these treaties are stopgaps. Buying time rather than ensuring security, espionage flourishes in the shadows of this balance. In Berlin, American spies pose as businessmen, slipping into embassies to steal blueprints of rockets and whispers of nuclear research. In Tokyo, double agents pass coded messages to Washington about Japanese fleet movements. And in New York, German operatives infiltrate shipping companies, mapping the arteries of American trade. The intelligence war becomes its own battlefield. MI6, operating from exile in Scotland and Canada, trains resistance fighters in sabotage. Soviet spies, though reduced in number, weave themselves into Berlin's ministries, selling information to the highest bidder. Every coded message, every intercepted transmission could tip the scales of this cold conflict. Technology accelerates under this pressure. Germany pours resources into jet aircraft and rockets, determined to maintain its edge. Japan experiments with carrier fleets larger than anything seen before. America responds with radar networks, long-range bombers, and its own nuclear project. The arms race begins not after 1945, but years earlier, driven by fear that any imbalance could invite war. The result is a global stalemate that feels eerily familiar, an early Cold War, but one far darker than the one we knew. Instead of democracy versus communism, the divide is democracy versus fascism America, against two vast empires bound by convenience. And yet, the balance is fragile. One spark could shatter it. Consider the Atlantic. German U-boats still prowl, attacking ships accidentally, testing American patience. Washington protests, Berlin denies, and the world inches closer to war with every sinking. Consider the Pacific. Japanese expansion presses into Indonesia, the Philippines, and the Indian Ocean. American patrols, shadow convoys, their presence a warning. Skirmishes flare, planes buzz each other. Submarines exchange torpedoes, yet both sides pull back. Unwilling to ignite the conflagration, consider espionage itself. Each spy ring discovered fuels paranoia. Each scientist defecting changes the race for the atom. Each rumor of betrayal could provoke retaliation far greater than intended. And consider the occupied peoples of Europe. For them, this cold peace is no peace at all. Hunger persists, resistance grows, and uprisings occasionally flare. In Warsaw, a rebellion breaks out, lasting weeks before it is drowned in blood. In Greece, partisans seize mountain villages, holding them briefly before the Wehrmacht retaliates. Each act of defiance draws America's eye, each atrocity pushing isolationists closer to silence and interventionists closer to fury. For ordinary citizens, the world feels suspended, caught between war and peace, between survival and annihilation. In Berlin, mothers tell their children that the Reich will last 1,000 years. In Paris, fathers whisper to their sons that the Reich will fall one day, even if they will not live to see it. In Washington, teachers warn students that freedom is fragile, more fragile than they ever imagined. This equilibrium, the cold peace of the 1940s, cannot last forever. The arms race accelerates, the spy wars deepen. Each power builds walls higher, weapons deadlier, and alliances shakier. And the haunting question grows louder. Will this fragile world hold? Or will one miscalculation, one clash, one betrayal, plunge it into fire again, this time with weapons that could erase entire cities in a flash? The answer remains suspended in this alternate timeline, hanging like a storm cloud heavy with lightning. Asterisk in. A world balanced on the edge of conflict, culture itself becomes a battlefield. In Berlin, art no longer questions, it obeys. Museums showcase Aryan classics, stripped of anything deemed degenerate. Jazz is banned, modernist paintings destroyed, books burned in great pyres that light the night sky. Yet underground, forbidden music survives. In Parisian basements, young men whisper along to smuggled records. Each note of jazz is secret rebellion. Each dance a defiance of silence. In Tokyo, theaters stage plays glorifying the empire, but students still scribble haiku that mourn freedom lost. In Moscow's shadows, even in its broken state, poets scrawl verses on scraps of paper, words of defiance hidden in pockets, passed hand to hand like contraband. And in America, the cultural mirror reflects tension. Hollywood produces films warning of tyranny, dramatizing both resistance and despair. Comic book heroes fight imaginary fascists on distant planets. Their battles metaphors for the conflict Washington dares not yet enter. Radio dramas speak of spies, of coded messages, of invisible wars fought in the night. Popular songs are laced with patriotism, reminding listeners that oceans may not shield them forever. Technology races forward as well. Germany pours resources into rocketry, creating the VO weapons not as desperation, but as the foundation of its empire. Jet aircraft roar across European skies, symbols of technological dominance. Japan, drawing on Germany's science, experiments with submarine aircraft. Carriers capable of striking distant shores. America, unwilling to fall behind, expands its laboratories. The Manhattan Project accelerates, radar grows more advanced. And computers, primitive but powerful, begin to hum in hidden bunkers. Innovation becomes a weapon, each side racing not only for bombs but for the future itself. Daily life under this shadow world is complex. In Berlin, a middle-class family enjoys new cars and apartments, their prosperity built on the suffering of conquered peoples. In Paris, the same middle-class family eats bread made from meager rations, its crust thick with the taste of survival. In London, a family huddles in a dimly lit home, their world shrinking with each passing year, yet their pride intact. In New York, A family sits around the dinner table, debating whether America should intervene or stand apart.
Ow.
The father fears another world war. The mother reads headlines of atrocities. Son dreams of flying planes across the ocean. The daughter wonders what future awaits if America waits too long. Propaganda collides with truth. German newsreels show gleaming autobahns and content citizens, while rumors of camps seep through cracks carried by refugees and whispers. American newspapers publish both images of strength and stories of horror, leaving readers uncertain which vision is real. Truth itself becomes a weapon wielded by both sides in the war of perception. Economically, the world shifts along fault lines. Germany exploits Europe's resources, but constant occupation drains it. Japan seizes Asian markets, yet guerrilla wars sap its profits. America prospers, its industries humming, its population swelling with refugees who bring new skills, ideas, and urgency. This economic triangle fuels tension. Germany and Japan controlling by conquest, America by innovation and abundance. And so the balance holds, but it is not stable, very passing. Year builds pressure. A clash of convoys in the Atlantic, an uprising in Warsaw, a spy caught in Washington. Any of these could spark the fire. It is not only politics and armies that tremble. Everyday people feel the weight of the suspended war. In Berlin, a student wonders if his generation will ever see peace, or if he will be sent east to patrol endless borders. In Paris, a young woman hides a radio in her attic, her life endangered by every broadcast she dares to hear. In Chicago, a factory worker bolts airplane parts together, aware that his labor may decide the fate of millions. This is the moderate path. Not total victory for the Reich, nor total collapse. Instead, it is a century that begins in tension, a world split into spheres. A cold peace haunted by the knowledge that peace may not last. And so we arrive at the reflective question: would this equilibrium endured for decades as the world grew accustomed to the balance? Or would it shatter within years, plunging the planet into another war, one fought not with tanks and rifles, but with bombs that could erase cities in an instant? History offers no answer, only the echo of possibility. The guns fall silent, but the world does not rest. In this alternate century, the shadow of the Reich stretches across decades, reshaping not only politics and borders, but culture, science, and even identity. The ripples of victory echo far beyond 1945. Europe is the heart of this new order. Berlin becomes the center of power, a metropolis rebuilt in marble and stone under Hitler's architect, Albert Speer. Plans for Germania rise from paper to skyline, avenues wider than any in Paris, domes towering higher than St. Peter's, monuments designed to awe and intimidate. Foreign dignitaries are paraded through the capital, marveling at its grandeur while reminded of its tyranny. France is reduced to a compliant partner. Its industries feed the Reich, its youth drafted into forced labor. The French language survives, but culture bends under censorship. Great writers publish only with approval, their works stripped of criticism. A Parisian might still stroll along, the sane, but every corner reminds them of occupation posters praising Germany, statues of Reich heroes, soldiers stationed at bridges. The cafe culture lingers, but whispers replace laughter, resistance hiding in plain sight. Britain, though never fully conquered, becomes an island on life support. Its empire fragmented, its trade suffocated. It clings to independence, but slowly drifts into irrelevance. Scotland, Wales, and Ireland splinter under German manipulation, each promised autonomy in exchange for compliance. London remains a proud capital, but its role is diminished. No longer a center of empire, but a ghost of what might have been. And the Soviet Union? Broken, divided, and occupied. Moscow lies in ruins, Leningrad renamed, Ukraine carved into German colonies. In the Urals, a fragment of the USSR persists, but it is little more than a guerrilla state, always fighting, never winning. The dream of communism does not vanish, but it becomes a spark scattered across Asia. Latin America. In Africa's promise of resistance feeding movements far from its original birthplace. Meanwhile, Germany itself transforms. For ordinary Germans, life is paradoxical. Prosperity rises, cars on new autobahns, apartments gleaming, food abundant, yet this comfort is built on exploitation. Behind the abundance lies the labor of millions enslaved, the resources of entire continents stripped bare. German children grow up pledging loyalty to the Führer, taught that their destiny is eternal rule. And yet, whispers survive even here. Doubts about endless wars, fears of rebellion, questions about morality. Even in the heart of the Reich, truth cannot be erased completely, but the ripples do not stop at Europe's borders. Across the Atlantic, the United States faces a future unlike the one we know. With Britain broken and Europe sealed under fascism, America never fights a triumphant DA, never liberates Paris, never strides into Berlin. Instead, it becomes a wary giant, bristling with weapons, watching an enemy across oceans it can never quite reach. American culture reflects this unease. Films depict looming threats, comic books battle fascist villains, novels warn of dystopian futures. Universities expand their research not in celebration but in fear, racing to match German. In Japanese advances, the Manhattan Project continues. But in a climate of desperation and arms race, without the confidence of victory, and in the Pacific, Japan reshapes Asia. China's coast is locked under occupation, its cities transformed into industrial engines. Korea is annexed fully, its culture suppressed, its people conscripted. In Southeast Asia, colonies once owned by Britain, France, and the Netherlands are claimed by Tokyo, declared part of its co-prosperity sphere. On paper, it is liberation from Western imperialism. In practice, it is simply another empire, ruthless and exploitative. Africa, too, is carved. North Africa falls under German control, its oil and ports fueling the Reich. Sub-Saharan Africa becomes a patchwork of colonies divided between Germany and Italy, their borders redrawn without regard for history or people. Resistance emerges, but it is crushed with overwhelming force. Generations grow up under foreign banners, their cultures eroded, their futures stolen. The Middle East changes dramatically. With the Suez under Axis control, the balance of power shifts. German troops secure oil fields in Iraq and Iran, binding the region to Berlin. Propaganda promises liberation from British rule, but the reality is occupation and resource extraction. The holy cities of Mecca and Medina fall under the gaze of new imperial masters, with their politics manipulated for strategic gain. And what of science and technology? In our real history, the devastation of war spurred innovation: jet aircraft, rocketry, nuclear power, computers, all shaped by Allied and Axis competition. But in this alternate path, the Reich accelerates its own programs with the spoils of conquest. Rockets launch sooner, jet planes dominate skies earlier, and nuclear research is weaponized relentlessly. By the 1950s, the world faces not the Cold War of Washington and Moscow, but a deadlier standoff. Washington versus Berlin and Tokyo. Democracy versus fascism, each armed with atomic fire. Culture itself warps. Imagine propaganda films in Paris showing German rockets on parade. Imagine American jazz band across Europe surviving only in underground clubs. Imagine children in Asia taught to worship the emperor as divine, while their textbooks erase all memory of resistance. The very identity of nations is rewritten. This is the ripple of victory. Not just borders changed, but minds reshaped, futures rewritten. And yet, history teaches us that empires, no matter how vast, carry within them seeds of collapse. Resistance never dies completely. Hunger breeds rebellion. Occupation breeds hatred. Even in this world of German dominance, cracks would form. The question is not if, but when would America bide its time until those cracks widened, waiting to strike? Would resistance movements grow strong enough to fracture the Reich from within? Or would nuclear weapons silence all opposition, freezing the world in fear for generations? The ripple effects stretch endlessly into the future. The cold peace of the 1940s becomes the cold, war of the 1950s, 1960s, and beyond. But it is a different Cold War one, where the dream of freedom hangs by a thread, and where one wrong move could erase civilization entirely. And as the decades pass, we are left with the haunting question: if this had been our world, if Germany had won, would our world today even exist? Step into an ordinary day in this alternate 1950s. In Berlin, a young boy wakes before dawn. His school uniform is pressed neatly, adorned with the Reichsiegel. At assembly, he and his classmates salute a portrait of Hitler, reciting pledges of loyalty. Mathematics is taught with military analogies, divisions, ratios of tanks to soldiers. History lessons erase the Enlightenment, portraying democracy as chaos and dictatorship as salvation. The boy believes every word. Questioning is dangerous, even in thought. Meanwhile, in New York, a teenager tunes a crackling radio to hear forbidden broadcasts. Refugees from Europe have smuggled stories across the Atlantic, rumors of uprisings in Warsaw, of secret resistance in Paris, of scientists fleeing the Reich. The American boy listens in awe and dread, knowing his own generation may be called to fight. His father, a veteran of World War I, insists that oceans will protect them. His mother whispers that no ocean is wide enough to stop atomic fire. In Tokyo, a girl sweeps the entrance of her family's shop. Posters of the emperor hang above the doorway, proclaiming him divine. At school, she learns of Japan's sacred destiny, how Asia prospers under its protection. Yet when she walks home, she sees her neighbors conscripted for labor, her cousins drafted into endless wars across the continent. She wonders if prosperity is merely another word for chains. In Cairo, a farmer rises to tend his fields, only to see German officials arrive to claim the harvest. His family eats what little remains, while most of the grain is shipped north to feed Berlin. In whispers, he dreams of rebellion, but he knows that uprisings are answered with massacres. Still, he tells his children stories of freedom, planting seeds that may outlast empire. These daily rhythms paint the fabric of life under Axis rule. Not apocalyptic fire, but suffocating normality. World where tyranny is routine, where obedience is survival, and yet the cracks deepen by the 1960s. The Cold Peace hardens into an arms race. Germany tests intercontinental rockets. Boasting of their ability to reach New York, Japan expands its navy, developing carriers large enough to dominate entire oceans. America responds with bombers, submarines, and missiles of its own. The planet becomes a chessboard of nuclear deterrence, each side waiting, watching, is terrified of a misstep. The fear seeps into culture. In Berlin, films glorify technology as proof of Reich superiority. Yet underground theaters screen smuggled American movies, their stories of freedom sparking forbidden dreams. In Tokyo, state-approved music celebrates empire, while jazz and blues circulate secretly among students yearning for rebellion. In America, science fiction imagines dystopias of fascist rule, serving as both warning and mirror. Technology, too, diverges. With Nazi rocket programs expanded, space exploration begins earlier. By the mid-1950s, Germany launches the first satellite. Not the Soviet Union. Its radio signal circles the globe, declaring the Reich's supremacy. The United States scrambles to respond, pouring resources into its own space race. The dream of reaching the stars becomes entangled with fear of domination. But beneath the competition, cooperation is impossible. In our real timeline, space exploration became a symbol of rivalry, yet also of shared wonder. In this alternate world, it becomes another front in a war that never ends. Every rocket is a potential weapon. Every satellite could be a spy. Every astronaut a soldier. For the occupied peoples, decades of Reich dominance grind down culture. Local languages survive only at home. Folk traditions are discouraged, replaced by parades and ceremonies dictated from Berlin, in France, in Tyre. Generations grow up knowing only life under the swastika, their grandparents' memories of freedom fading into myth. In Eastern Europe, villages disappear, their lands resettled by German colonists. The map itself changes. erasing old names, stamping them with new ones that reflect the conqueror's tongue, and yet rebellion never dies. Underground presses still print illegal newspapers. Priests deliver sermons with hidden messages. Students pass forbidden books. A song hummed in secret, a phrase scratched on a wall, a protest whispered in alleys all become weapons of memory, keeping alive the knowledge that the world was once different. Meanwhile, in Washington, the pressure builds. Every president faces the same dilemma: how to confront an empire across oceans armed with nuclear weapons. Some advocate patience, hoping the Reich will rot from within. Others argue for confrontation, fearing that waiting only strengthens the enemy. The American public lives under the shadow of this question, its politics defined by fear of fascism. Abroad, by the 1970s, the stalemate begins to fray. Germany and Japan, allies in victory, grow suspicious of each other. Berlin eyes Asia's resources. Tokyo resents Berlin's dominance in technology. Trade disputes, espionage, accusations, and border skirmishes in Central Asia threaten to tear the Axis apart. The world teeters on the edge, not of liberation, but of a new global war, this time between the victors themselves and America, watching closely. Must decide, should it remain an observer or strike when its enemies are distracted? This is the haunting shape of the moderate timeline extended forward, a divided world. Technology, racing, cultures warped, rebellions flickering, and three superpowers locked in perpetual tension. It is not a question of if the balance will break, but when and what will follow in the storm's wake. By the 1980s, the world has lived under the shadow of fascist victory for nearly 4 decades. For those born after the war, there is no memory of liberation. No stories of Allied triumph, only the reality of the Reich and the Empire of Japan. And yet, the longer empires endure, the more their cracks widen. In Europe, the German Reich strains under its own weight. At first, conquest fueled prosperity. Industries roared with resources plundered from the east. Cities gleamed with marble, monuments. But by the 1980s, occupation has turned to stagnation. Resistance movements, though bloodied, never died. In Poland, underground unions organize strikes, paralyzing industries. In Paris, student protests erupt, graffiti covering walls, with slogans of freedom. Even in Berlin, whispers of dissent emerge among a younger generation, raised on propaganda, but restless for truth. The Reich responds with repression, mass arrests, secret police raids, executions broadcast as warnings, yet the more it clamps down, the more it fuels the very rebellion it fears. Tyranny, once absolute, begins to corrode from within. Japan, too, faces turmoil. Its empire stretches vast, but guerrilla wars bleeded in Southeast Asia. China never submits fully. Resistance simmers across its countryside, draining Japanese resources. The dream of a harmonious co-prosperity sphere becomes a nightmare of endless uprisings. By the 1980s, Tokyo faces the same paradox as Berlin. Outward power, inward fragility. Meanwhile, America stands as the rival giant. Its economy flourishes, driven by technology and arms. Its culture, Hollywood films, jazz, rock and roll.
Television seeps across the ocean, smuggled even into occupied territories.
People yearn for something beyond the Reich's parades and Japan's decrees. American music plays in hidden basements in Paris. American jeans are traded in black markets in Warsaw. American films inspire whispers of freedom in Tokyo Student. Circles. Culture becomes the battlefield of the cold peace. And then come the crisis flashpoints that threaten to ignite the long-simmering tension. In 1983, a German rocket launch is mistaken by Washington as a nuclear strike. Sirens blare, bombers scramble, submarines surface. For 30 minutes, the world holds its breath, believing annihilation is seconds away. At the last moment, clarification arrives. It was a satellite test, not a missile launch. But the close call rattles millions, exposing how fragile peace truly is. In 1987, rebellion explodes in the Balkans. Yugoslav partisans, long suppressed, rise in coordinated attacks across cities. German divisions rushed to respond, but uprisings spread faster than suppression. For months, the Reich is consumed by fire in the Balkans, entire provinces slipping from control. America debates whether to intervene, sending aid, weapons, or perhaps even troops. Ultimately, Washington holds back, fearing global war. But the message is clear. The Reich is not invincible. The nuclear balance also shifts. By the late 20th century, America and Germany both possess vast arsenals. Japan lags slightly behind but retains enough to ensure destruction. The arms race consumes budgets, technology, and imaginations. School children practice drills, hiding under desks from bombs that could erase entire cities. Civil defense posters line streets in Berlin, Tokyo, and New York alike, reminding citizens daily that survival hangs by a thread. And yet, while fear dominates politics, ordinary people carve lives in the cracks. In Berlin, young artists paint, murals mocking the Reich in subtle symbols only the knowing can read. In Tokyo, students protest against endless wars in China, chanting for democracy despite police batons. In America, activists demand an end to the stalemate, fearing that a single misstep will doom the world. Technology accelerates under this tension. Computers emerge sooner, satellites cover the globe, and space stations circle the Earth not as symbols of shared humanity, but as armed outposts watching enemies below. The dream of exploration is shackled to suspicion. Where in our world, astronauts shook hands in orbit, here they glare across control rooms, each side convinced the other plots sabotage. By the late 20th century, the cold peace feels less like peace and more like slow suffocation. Three empires glare at one another across oceans, each terrified of blinking first. And yet, inside those empires, the people changed in Europe. Underground networks spread ideas of democracy, equality, resistance. In Asia, independence movements refused to die, even after decades of occupation. In America, public patience thin citizens ask why freedom should stand idle while billions live under chains. The great question of this alternate century becomes clear. Can tyranny last forever, even when armed with bombs and rockets? Or does every empire, no matter how vast, eventually crack under its own contradictions? The 1980s are the crucible. The Reich appears strong, but its marble facades hide decay. Japan boasts of empire, but its hold on Asia bleeds daily. America projects confidence, but it too fears collapse if it miscalculates. The balance holds, but only just. And as the 20th century closes, the cliffhanger intensifies. Will the world drift into the 21st century under this suffocating truce, or will fire return fire that this time could consume everything? The answer lies not only in governments or armies, but in the hearts of people who refuse to forget that history was not always written by tyrants. Asterisk. The century turns. It is the year 2000 in this alternate timeline. The world is exhausted. The Reich, once unstoppable, shows the deep lines of age. Its vast empire staggers under the weight of endless repression. The colonies carved from Eastern Europe bleed resources, but never yield loyalty. Strikes in Poland ripple into Hungary, into Ukraine. Each uprising is crushed, yet each one rises faster than the last. The SS cannot silence an entire continent forever, even in Berlin, where propaganda still fills the airwaves. Graffiti appears at night. Freedom will return. Japan faces the same reckoning. Its empire stretches across Asia, but its grip is brittle. Guerrilla wars continue in China. Independence movements burn in Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Young Japanese question why they must die in foreign jungles for victories their fathers claimed half a century ago. Economic stagnation creeps in. While black markets overflow with forbidden American culture, rock music, blue jeans, films about heroes who always seem to speak of liberty in America, the other pillar of this divided world has changed as well. For decades, it has lived in vigilance, braced against the possibility of nuclear annihilation. Its citizens know the constant hum of fear, air raid sirens tested monthly, fallout shelters in suburban basements, presidents addressing the nation with stern warnings. Yet beneath that fear, lies resilience. America thrives as a beacon of alternative possibility. Its culture slipping through borders. No iron wall can fully block. Technology has leaped forward under pressure. Rockets span the globe. Satellites watch every movement. Computers evolve into networks of information. And in this world, too, the internet is born, but its currents flow differently. In Berlin and Tokyo, it is censored, watched, twisted into propaganda. In America, it becomes a tool of openness, spreading ideas across oceans in ways no border guards can contain. For the first time, cracks in the Axis information walls widen. As dissidents learn that their lives of fear are not shared everywhere. By the dawn of the 21st century, the world faces a choice. The Reich and Japan still stand, but their foundations tremble. Resistance movements coordinate through hidden networks. Underground newspapers become digital, harder to erase. Defectors flee across borders with evidence of atrocities. Rumors spread of mutinies within the Wehrmacht, of coups plotted in Tokyo. It is the echo of a truth history has always shown. No empire lasts forever. Rome fell. Napoleon fell. Even the mightiest powers rot from within when their people no longer believe, and so the question hangs. Would the Reich and Japan collapse under the weight of their own lies? Or would they unleash their arsenals one final time, dragging the world into fire rather than surrender? For us in our real timeline, these questions are only speculation. We know how history truly unfolded. The Allies fought back. The Soviets held at Stalingrad. America stormed the beaches of Normandy. Berlin burned. Tokyo surrendered. And the world scarred, but free-stepped into a new era. Our Cold War was fought not between democracy and fascism, communism. Our 20th century was defined not by a Reich triumphant, but by its ashes. And though our world has known struggles, it is one in which freedom survived, art thrived, and the shadow of the swastika was banished to memory. That is why alternate history matters, not as fantasy, but as a reminder. History was never inevitable. Victory was not guaranteed. It was carved by choices, sacrifices, fragile moments, where the future balanced on a knife's edge. So as we close this journey, imagine the weight of that question. If Germany had won, if the swastika still flew over Europe, if the world had grown under the cold peace of tyranny, would you sitting here now even exist to ask the question? Would our languages, our freedoms, our cultures, even our very identities have survived? Answers unknowable, but the reflection is powerful, because history is not only about the past. It is about vigilance in the present. And if this story moved you, if you felt the chill of the world that might have been, then I invite you to join the conversation. Like this video, subscribe for more journeys into the world's history, almost. Gave us and share your own vision of what might have happened. What do you think? Would the Reich have endured into the 21st century, or would it have collapsed under the weight of its own hubris? History leaves the question open. Oh, the rest is for us to imagine.